When my son announced to me in church that I was unwanted at Christmas, I just smirked and went home. 2 days later, I had 100 missed calls. And not a single one I wanted to answer. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now let's get started. I was 61 years old, and the church in Cedar Falls glowed as if the whole town had poured its hope and grief into candles and garlands. The wooden rafters trembled with the choir's carols, the sharp winter air lingered on coats piled in the pews, and the faces of neighbors shone red-cheeked from the cold. Every year I had been here, and every year I had brought my children, sometimes dragging them half asleep from the car. I had sat through these same hymns holding Daniel's small hand, whispering to Rebecca to stop fidgeting, carrying hot chocolate in a thermos so that afterward we could sip it together and laugh under the snow. Those memories were alive in me as I sat near the aisle, a candle flickering in my hand, the wax dripping onto the crumpled paper circle. I thought I was safe in tradition. I thought that whatever cracks existed in my family, Christmas Eve in this church would hold them together, at least for an hour. Then my son Daniel stood up. His voice, raw and deliberate, cut through silent night like glass shattering on tile. "Mom, stop pretending you're needed. You're not wanted at Christmas." The hymn collapsed mid-verse. The piano's last note hung alone, then died. The congregation froze, every head swiveling toward me as though I had been caught stealing from the offering plate. Even Pastor Marsh, who had officiated Daniel's baptism and who once called me a woman of iron faith, frowned in confusion from the pulpit. And then Katie smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an attempt to soften her husband's cruelty, but a sharp, satisfied curve of her mouth that told me she had been waiting for this moment. The candlelight caught the glint in her eyes. She looked at me the way a cat looks at a cornered mouse. I kept still, though my heart hammered so violently it felt like the wooden pew might rattle beneath me. Slowly I turned toward my son, the boy I had raised from infancy, who had once tugged at my coat sleeve every Christmas Eve and asked, "Mom, is Jesus really here with us?" "So, son," I said, my voice cutting the air as clean as a blade, "you decided to turn me into a circus act right here in church?" A collective gasp rustled the pews. Daniel's face flushed scarlet, but instead of shame, he fed his pride. "You've always meddled in everything," he shouted as if rehearsed. "We want a life without your control and lectures." The word "we" landed heavier than all the rest. He didn't say "I." He said "we." Katie's smirk deepened. I looked around. The congregation, families who had watched me raise 2 children alone after my husband ran away with another woman, suddenly avoided my eyes. Mothers who had borrowed my casseroles, fathers whose kids I'd driven home from choir practice, all stared at the hymnals in their laps as though reading invisible notes. A whisper of shame ran through the pews, but it wasn't Daniel's. It was mine. And yet I remembered. I remembered the winters when I had no money for presents and made hand-sewn dolls, staying up until dawn. I remembered dragging myself from 12-hour shifts at the bank, my bones aching, only to drive my children through blizzards so they wouldn't miss practice. I remembered scraping pennies to buy the piano on which Rebecca learned carols, the same piano now played by other children in that church. I remembered being needed. But now my son's voice rang out like a verdict. Not wanted. Katie adjusted her coat, leaned against the pew as if this humiliation were her triumph. The woman I had welcomed into my house with open arms, whose pregnancies I had supported with groceries and rent money, looked at me as though I were a stain on her perfect Christmas dress. My lips curved into a crooked smile, not of amusement but of clarity. Something inside me, stretched thin for decades, snapped. I rose. The wooden bench groaned. My candle shook in my hand but did not go out. I raised my voice so that even the choir boys hiding at the back could hear me. "Fine then. Live your life. Just without me." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Even the wax seemed to freeze mid-drip. I turned, set the candle gently on the pew, and walked down the aisle. My boots struck the floor in sharp echoes, each step pulling me farther from 61 years of sacrifice, from the illusion that family loyalty was unbreakable. No one stopped me. Not a hand reached out. Not even Rebecca. The church doors opened with a groan, and the winter night swallowed me whole. The wind was a blade against my cheeks. Snow fell in small, merciless flakes, each one like an ash of something burned. Behind me, carols resumed, quieter now, as though nothing had happened. I stood outside, breath clouding the air, and realized that in one sentence, "You're not wanted at Christmas," my son had erased decades of motherhood. And yet, as the cold wrapped itself around me, I also realized something else. If I was truly unwanted, then perhaps I no longer owed them the shelter of my silence, the comfort of my endless giving. The night stretched wide and dark, but for the first time in years, I felt it belonged to me. When I stepped back into my house that night, the December cold clung to my coat like another layer of skin. I closed the door softly, almost reverently, as though slamming it would summon the whole congregation into my living room to replay my disgrace. The kitchen greeted me in darkness, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound, a low mechanical reminder that at least one thing in my life still worked without complaint. I dropped my coat on the chair by the door, not bothering to hang it as I always did. For 61 years I had lived by habits, by neatness, by order. That night disorder felt truer. The chair sagged under the weight of my damp coat, and I walked past it into the black silence of my kitchen. The phone on the counter was already alive. Messages stacked up in glowing lines, notifications spilling across the screen. Neighbors, fellow choir members, women from the prayer circle, even Pastor Marsh himself. I let it ring and ring. Each vibration seemed to accuse me, to demand that I weep or defend myself or crawl into their arms for pity. I would give them none of that. They wanted a spectacle, tears, hysteria. The image of a mother collapsed under the cruelty of her son. But I had given enough performances in my life. The smiling single mother who never let her exhaustion show. The perfect hostess who set out casseroles after double shifts. The strong parishioner who led the Christmas toy drive even when her own children's stockings hung thin. I was finished with theater. I filled the kettle, its hollow clang echoing through the empty room, and set it on the burner. The silence after the storm pressed into my bones, not warm, not welcoming, but mercifully mine. On the fridge door hung old photographs, curling at the edges. Daniel at 12 holding a trombone almost bigger than he was, grinning with teeth still uneven. Rebecca at 8 in the angel costume I had sewn from an old bedsheet, her cardboard halo tilting to one side. I stared at them as the kettle began to hiss. I had carried those children through winters, through sickness, through the humiliation of being left by their father. I had been their whole scaffolding. And in the end, scaffolding is always invisible once the building stands tall. The phone rang again. I let it go. My hand twitched once toward it, the old instinct to answer, to soothe, to explain, but I pulled back. I would not give them the show. Instead, I took a pen and a scrap of paper from the drawer and wrote a note to myself, in blunt block letters. Don't give them the show. I pinned it with a magnet right between the two photographs, so that Daniel and Rebecca's frozen smiles stared back at me with that command branded between them. The kettle shrieked, and I poured the water into a chipped mug, watching the steam rise like breath in the cold. I brewed tea slowly, deliberately, as though each swirl of the spoon was a spell of protection. I carried the mug to the table and sat down. The silence was thick, almost viscous. In the old days, Christmas Eve would have been filled with noise. Daniel teasing his sister, Rebecca begging me to open just one gift before morning, the clatter of wrapping paper, my own tired laughter covering the ache in my back. Now there was only the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old house settling into winter, and the buzz of my phone demanding I justify my humiliation. I sipped the tea and tasted iron more than chamomile. My throat still carried the sting of Daniel's words. You're not wanted at Christmas. They ricocheted inside me, but instead of breaking me, they hollowed me out, clearing space where obligation used to sit. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. For decades, sleep had come to me only with guilt, as if rest were indulgence while bills waited unpaid, while children waited to be ferried to practices, while dinners needed cooking. That night, for the first time in decades, I felt no such guilt. I felt emptied, yes. Crushed, certainly. But also released. I thought of the church, the stairs, the whispers, Katie's triumphant smirk. I pictured their faces turning toward me like sunflowers bending toward light. Only this time I was not the light but the spectacle of shame. Let them whisper. Let them recount it over their turkey dinners tomorrow. Did you hear Daniel Reed told his mother off right there during Silent Night? Poor woman. But maybe she had it coming. I would not be there to correct them. I would not rush to defend myself, to plead context, to explain away my son's cruelty. Let them think what they wanted. Silence, I realized, is heavier than any defense. I wrote again on the scrap of paper, under the first line. Silence is worse than tears. I pressed the pen so hard it nearly tore through. The phone lit up once more, vibrating against the countertop like an insect trapped under glass. I ignored it. I let it die down again, the screen going black, the house plunging deeper into its cocoon of dark. I rose, rinsed the mug, left it drying by the sink. Then, with a steadiness that surprised me, I walked to my bedroom. The air smelled faintly of cedar from the old dresser, mixed with the mothballs I'd placed in drawers years ago. I undressed slowly, folded my clothes, not because anyone was watching, not because order mattered to anyone else, but because it was mine, my ritual. I lay down in the bed that suddenly felt too wide, the sheets cold against my legs, and waited for the old familiar churn of guilt to keep me awake. But it did not come. Instead, I slept. Deep, unbroken, guiltless sleep. The kind I had not known since before Daniel and Rebecca were born, before obligation became my daily air. And in that sleep, the storm receded. No more carols, no more whispers, no more son's voice echoing across pews. Just silence. The silence of someone who had finally decided to stop saving those who had publicly crucified her. The silence of a woman who had chosen herself. The morning after the humiliation in church, I woke with a strange lightness. My body felt sore, as if I had been beaten in the night, but my mind was oddly clear. The phone, of course, was waiting for me on the table, a black stone buzzing with missed calls and texts. I ignored it as I boiled water for tea. It wasn't until the phone rang with my daughter's name, Rebecca, that I finally picked it up. Her voice came through tight, clipped, without a trace of warmth. Mom, Dan was right. It's time you stepped back. You're in the way. I froze, teacup halfway to my lips. In the way. My voice cracked, though I forced it flat. Rebecca, I raised you alone when your father ran off with another woman. I worked 2 jobs. I sold my jewelry to pay your college tuition. And you never let us forget it, she snapped. Always reminding us of your sacrifices. Enough. We're adults now. We don't need you hovering over everything. Her words landed sharper than Daniel's. He had humiliated me in public, yes, but Rebecca was my quiet child, the one I thought would defend me. Her betrayal had the precision of a blade slipped between ribs. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles whitened. Hovering? Is that what you call covering your bills when your car broke down last winter? Is that what you call watching your son every Friday night so you and your husband could have your precious date nights? Hovering. Mom, you make everything about money, she said coldly. We didn't ask you to do those things. I laughed bitterly. You didn't have to ask. You left the invoices on my table. You sent late-night texts about emergencies. You knew I couldn't watch you suffer. Rebecca was silent for a moment, and in that pause I felt the invisible thread between us, the one I had nurtured for 3 decades, snap. And then she said it. Katie was right. Maybe you should learn to rest more. Maybe you don't need to come to every dinner, every holiday. We're trying to build our own lives, Mom. Katie. Always Katie. I could hear her voice in those words, sugary and poisonous. Your mom gets tired. Maybe she shouldn't join us for family dinners. Maybe she needs to take care of herself more. That was how she said it, always soft, always smiling, while in the same breath she asked me to cover their electricity bill, to loan them money just until Daniel's next paycheck, to buy their son's birthday cake because you know how to bake better than I do. Hypocrisy. No, that word was too small. This wasn't just inconsistency. This was a habit, a parasitic way of living where my sacrifices were both demanded and ridiculed. Rebecca, I said finally, my voice low and steady, tell me one thing. Did Katie coach you to make this call? Mom, don't twist everything into some conspiracy. We just want space. We just want independence. Independence. I nearly laughed out loud. Independence built on my checkbook, my sleepless nights, my willingness to swallow humiliation. Then live independent, I said flatly. Start by paying your own bills. Mom. I hung up. My hand trembled as I set the phone down, but I felt no regret. I stared out the kitchen window. Snowflakes tumbled against the glass, each one vanishing as it touched the pane, like years of effort dissolving into nothing. How many nights had I driven through snowstorms to pick up Rebecca from rehearsals? I remembered my hands stiff on the steering wheel, the heater broken in that old Ford, Rebecca humming carols in the passenger seat. She had fallen asleep with her head against the frosted window more than once, trusting me to carry her safely home. And now she said, "You're in the way." I pressed my palm against the window pane, feeling the cold seep through. In the reflection I saw the lines of my own face, etched deeper than I remembered. Not age alone, sacrifice. Years of silencing myself so my children could speak louder. The phone buzzed again, this time a text from Daniel. "Katie says you need help. We can't keep doing this if you're going to act unstable." Unstable. Another word Katie had planted like a seed. For years she had been whispering, not loudly, not directly, but steadily, "Your mom gets tired. Your mom forgets things sometimes. Maybe your mom shouldn't be alone." And in the same breath, "Can you ask her to help with the deposit? Can she watch the baby? Can she pay the dentist bill?" They wanted me both erased and endlessly available. Invisible in their lives but present in their wallets. The hypocrisy burned my throat. I remembered another Christmas 20 years ago, when money was so tight I had skipped paying the gas bill to buy Daniel the leather basketball shoes he wanted. He had ripped the wrapping paper with shining eyes, thrown his arms around me, shouted, "Mom, you're the best." We had eaten soup by candlelight that night because the heat was gone, but I had been proud. Proud to give him something he dreamed of even at my expense. And now, 20 years later, in that same church where I once watched him as a shepherd in the Christmas play, he had looked me in the eye and said, "You're not wanted." I sat down at the kitchen table, the tea long gone cold, and stared at my notes from the night before. Don't give them the show. Silence is worse than tears. I added another line. They want me erased, but only after I've emptied myself for them. The word steadied me. For so long I had thought of myself as their protector, their scaffolding. But scaffolding is meant to be dismantled once the structure is built. I had forgotten that. I folded the note and placed it inside my wallet, a private oath. The phone buzzed again, but I did not look. Not at Daniel's messages. Not at Rebecca's. Not at Katie's smug manipulations. For the first time I began to see the truth. I was not family to them anymore. I was a resource, purse, a tool. And tools are only useful until they break. The church doors had barely closed behind me before the story began to grow legs of its own. By the next morning, the whispers had already reached places I hadn't walked in weeks. Cedar Falls was a small town. Gossip traveled faster than weather. I went to the grocery store out of habit, though my body moved as though trudging through snowdrifts. The aisles were bright, the smell of oranges sharp in the air. I pushed my cart past the bread shelf, pretending I didn't feel the eyes on me. "That's her," I heard the cashier murmur to the bag boy, her voice low but not low enough. "The mom who got thrown out at church." The boy, barely 16, glanced at me with wide eyes, then dropped his gaze as though my face carried contagion. Two women by the apples whispered into each other's ears. One looked at me with pity, the other with smug delight, as if she'd been handed new meat for her endless chatter. In the parking lot, men in heavy coats leaned against their trucks. Their voices carried on the wind. "Did you hear? Her own son told her off. In church no less." I loaded my groceries in silence. Each word was a stone, but I carried them one by one, stacking them inside myself. Let them gossip. Let them feast. I would not give them the tears they wanted. When I got home, the phone lit up again. This time it was a message from Pastor Marsh. "Don't take it too hard. Your son lost his temper." Lost his temper? I nearly laughed. No, this wasn't an accident. Daniel's words had been sharp, deliberate, rehearsed even. His voice hadn't cracked with sudden rage. It had rung with practiced confidence. He had meant every syllable. And Katie's smile had been proof enough that it was no slip of the tongue. I typed my reply with steady fingers. "No, Pastor Marsh. He planned it. And I can plan too." I pressed send, set the phone aside, and stood still in my quiet kitchen. The house hummed with its usual sounds, the tick of the old wall clock, the faint drip in the sink, but I felt something shift inside me. Not collapse. Not despair. Something harder. Something colder. I walked to the cabinet in the hallway, the one no one but me ever opened. Behind stacks of linens and a half-empty shoebox of Christmas cards lay a yellow folder, its edges frayed from decades of use. I pulled it out, set it on the table, and opened it like a book of spells. Inside were documents no one ever asked about, because no one ever cared how things were held together. The mortgage papers, the title to the duplex Daniel and Katie lived in, the guarantor forms I had signed for Daniel's business loan, the power of attorney documents they had pressed me to sign just in case. For years I had carried these responsibilities in silence, like invisible scaffolding propping up their lives. They assumed the bills paid themselves, that credit was conjured from thin air, that roofs stayed solid by divine grace. They never asked why the internet worked, why the bank never called, why the landlord never raised a fuss. It was me. Always me. And now they wanted me out of the picture? Fine. Let's see how they function without the hands that held up their picture frame. I ran my fingers across the documents. Decades of signatures, of fine print, of invisible chains. They had wanted to reduce me to nothing, but they had forgotten. The nothing they despised was the same nothing that held every key to their lives. A bitterness swelled in my chest. I remembered every slight, every whispered suggestion from Katie. Your mom gets tired, maybe she should skip the dinners. I remembered the way Daniel let her words pass into him like smoke filling a hollow vessel, until he believed they were his own. I remembered the years of Christmas mornings when my children tore into gifts I had bought on credit, gifts I paid off in installments while I wore the same winter coat 5 seasons in a row. I remembered the years of unpaid overtime at the bank, the double shifts, the humiliation of begging managers for advances just so the children could have new shoes. And now? Now I was an old woman to be discarded. A nuisance. A shadow too heavy for their shining lives. I closed the folder, but the decision had already taken root. They thought the humiliation in church was the end of me. They thought the whispers at the grocery store would break my spine. They thought gossip would finish what Daniel's words had started. But gossip is air. Documents are stone. As the evening fell and snow pressed against the windows, I brewed another cup of tea. I placed the yellow folder on the table in front of me like a quiet companion. For years I had been their savior, their rescuer, their invisible benefactor. Now I would become something else. They had turned me into a spectacle. I would turn myself into their reckoning. 2 days later my phone looked like a crime scene. 100 missed calls. Maybe more. The screen refused to show them all at once, only a growing red number that glared like a wound. Most were from Daniel, some from Rebecca, a few from numbers I didn't recognize but which I knew were Katie's attempts from borrowed phones. The first voice message came in the morning, loud enough to rattle the kitchen counter. Mom, the internet's cut off. What the hell did you do? I set the phone down without answering. The kettle hissed softly. I poured hot water over tea leaves, breathing in steam as his fury spat from the speaker. Mom, answer me. This isn't funny. The bill was due 2 days ago and you always pay it. The company says the account holder canceled the automatic transfer. Did you do that? Did you? I sipped slowly, letting the tea burn my tongue. Another message, angrier. You're trying to ruin us. You have to help. We've got deadlines, the baby needs his shows, Katie needs her laptop for work. This is cruel, Mom. You can't just. I pressed the playback forward. His voice cracked into panic. Please. Call me. Just tell me this was a mistake. I picked up the phone and spoke evenly into the receiver, knowing the words would carve him deeper than any scream. I stopped paying for it. Time to live on your own dime. There was silence. Then a gasp, then the line went dead. Within minutes the phone rang again. This time I let it go unanswered. Then came Rebecca, her voice shrill with disbelief. Mom, Dan says you canceled everything. Are you crazy? How can you cut off the internet when they have a child? How can you do this to your grandson? I didn't reply. I made myself a sandwich, spread mustard carefully, each motion deliberate. More calls. More messages. Daniel's tone shifted, from fury to pleading. Mom, please, you don't understand. We need this. We can't just, our whole lives are connected. Katie's classes, my business orders, Mom, don't do this. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was a misunderstanding, a lapse. He didn't believe yet that I had chosen to let the lights dim. I remembered nights 20 years ago, when I came home from my bank job past midnight and still opened bills with trembling hands, choosing which one I could afford to pay late. The phone would ring, then 2 collectors threatening, demanding. I had answered those calls. I had begged, bargained, cut into my own skin to keep the children warm. Now the roles were reversed. My own children were the collectors, screaming into my voicemail, demanding their due. And I was the debtor who finally hung up. By noon the calls grew frantic. Mom, the electric bill. They say it wasn't paid either. What's happening? I sat at the table with the yellow folder open before me, leafing through documents like a general reviewing maps before a battle. The duplex lease. The business guarantor form. Each paper was a thread in the web that held them. I had been the spider and the fly, weaving and trapped all at once. Another message crackled through. You're heartless. We're your family. Families don't do this to each other. I laughed out loud, the sound startling even to me. Families don't do this to each other? My son had thrown me out of Christmas Eve in front of the entire town. My daughter had told me I was in the way. Katie had smiled like a victor at my public execution. That was what family had done to me. The phone rang again. This time I answered. Daniel's voice spilled out, ragged, desperate. Mom, please just bring things back to normal. I was angry, okay? I didn't mean it like that. We need you. The bills, the accounts, I can't manage all of this. Just please. No, Daniel, I said calmly. I don't have to do anything. You wanted independence. Now you've got it. His breath caught on the other end. You don't mean that. I do. He swore under his breath, then hung up. The silence afterward was delicious. Not the silence of shame, like the church pews turning away. Not the silence of abandonment. This was the silence of a switch flipped off, of a machine shutting down. The silence of power. I brewed another cup of tea and wrote another line on my growing note. A bank machine can be switched off. That night, as I lay in bed, the phone buzzed again, vibrating on the nightstand like a trapped insect. 100 missed calls. I let it buzz itself into exhaustion, the screen going black in defeat. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and whispered into the dark. Not for them but for myself. Live your life. Just without me. And for the first time I meant it. After the calls stopped for the night, after the screen went dark and the house sank into silence, the memories began to rise. They came not as warm comforts, but as ghosts, each one dragging the chains of years I had given away. I remembered the years of double shifts at the bank, when I would stumble home with feet numb inside cracked shoes, my uniform still smelling of stale air and ink from paper money. I would walk through the door and find Daniel asleep on the couch, his schoolbooks scattered, Rebecca curled on the rug with her dolls. I should have collapsed in bed, but instead I cooked. Rice, beans, sometimes just scrambled eggs, anything to make sure their bellies were full before morning. I remembered snowstorms when the Ford rattled down icy roads, my hands locked on the wheel. Daniel in the back seat, Rebecca singing carols softly to herself, both of them trusting me to steer them through the white blindness. I drove with a scarf wrapped so tight around my face I could barely breathe, praying the car wouldn't slide into the ditch. Not once did they miss a practice, a recital, a play. I made sure of that. I remembered Christmas mornings when the tree was small, the lights secondhand, but the gifts piled as high as my knees. How many of those gifts had been bought with credit cards I couldn't pay off for months? How many nights did I go without dinner so they could tear paper with shining eyes? And I remembered the sewing machine humming past midnight, scraps of fabric piled like snowdrifts around me, costumes for Rebecca's school plays, patches on Daniel's sports uniforms. I bled from needle pricks more than once, but I kept sewing. No one else would make them costumes. No one else cared if their shirts were mended. Their father had vanished when they were small. He left me with nothing but overdue bills and 2 mouths to feed. I had been mother and father both, the roof and the floor, the hands that held them and the back that carried them. And for years I believed that sacrifice meant security, that one day they would remember, they would protect me as I had protected them. But standing in church, hearing Daniel's words, "You're not wanted at Christmas," I realized that all my sacrifices had been rebranded as burdens. That every meal I cooked, every bill I paid, every winter coat I bought had not made me precious. It had made me invisible. They didn't want me gone. Not really. They wanted me mute. Silent. A machine that paid the bills without asking questions. A babysitter who appeared when summoned, A mother erased in public but kept on retainer in private. That was the truth. I remembered Rebecca's voice on the phone that morning. "You're in the way." She wasn't wrong. I was in the way of their perfect performance, in the way of Katie's new regime, in the way of the fiction that they were self-made adults. But I was never in the way when rent was due. Never in the way when Rebecca's car broke down. Never in the way when Katie needed just a little help with groceries. Then I was convenient, then I was indispensable. A memory stabbed through me. Daniel at 12, standing in the kitchen holding up his report card. "Look, Mom, all A's," he had shouted, eyes bright. I had hugged him, told him I was proud, and then cried in the bathroom because the electric company had sent another shut-off notice. I had paid it late, scraping together coins from a jar, so he could do his homework by light instead of candles. I had been proud then. Proud to give, proud to endure. Now I saw it differently. It wasn't pride. It was training. I had trained them to see my sacrifices as normal, endless, expected. I had trained them to view me as background noise, like the hum of the refrigerator, always there, never noticed until it breaks. And when I finally broke, when I dared to sit in a pew on Christmas Eve and exist not as a wallet but as a mother, Daniel had declared me unwanted. The words rolled again in my head, cold and absolute. "You're not wanted." I poured myself another cup of tea, though the taste had long turned metallic. I stared at the yellow folder on the table, its edges worn from years of being opened, signed, closed, stored. That folder contained my life's work, the bones of my sacrifices. Leases, loans, credit agreements. Invisible things that had kept Daniel and Rebecca's world spinning. They thought I was unnecessary. They thought I was replaceable. But a bank machine is only useful until it stops dispensing. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, and whispered into the quiet. I was never unwanted. I was just useful. And now I'm done. For the first time, the word done didn't feel like defeat. Felt like power. The morning after my long vigil with the yellow folder, I dressed with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Not for church, not for family, not for appearances, but for myself. A wool skirt, a pressed blouse, the good coat I had saved for special occasions. This, I decided, was a special occasion. The day I stopped being their silent scaffold and began to dismantle theirs. I drove through the brittle cold to the brick building on Main Street where Mr. Hale kept his office. The man had been our family lawyer for decades. He had helped me after the divorce, guided me through the mortgage, even drawn up simple wills when I thought my children would protect me one day. I had believed then that paperwork was just precaution, that love was stronger than signatures. Now I knew better. Mr. Hale was older now, his hair thinned to wisps of silver, his spectacles resting low on his nose. He looked up as I entered, his eyes widening. "Mrs. Reed," he said gently, "I heard what happened at church. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I replied. "I'm here because of it." We sat in his office, the shelves lined with leather-bound books, the air dry with the scent of paper and dust. I laid the yellow folder on his desk with a finality that made him lift his brows. "I want to cancel all powers of attorney," I said. "Every last one. Revoke any joint authority Daniel or Rebecca have over my accounts. And I want to end my role as guarantor on Daniel's business credit line." He leaned back, tapping a pen against his chin. "That's a serious step. Are you sure?" "I've never been surer." He nodded slowly. "And the duplex?" "It's still in my name," I said. "I've been renting it to them at a fraction of market rate. That ends now. Draft a notice. 60 days until lease renewal at full market rent, or they move out." Mr. Hale studied me, perhaps searching for hesitation. But I gave him none. My voice was steady, my hands folded neatly on my lap. Inside, though, memories roared. I saw Daniel at 20, begging me to co-sign his first loan. "Just this once, Mom. I'll make you proud." I had signed, heart swelling with foolish pride. He had defaulted twice and I had cleaned up the mess. I saw Rebecca crying over her first apartment lease, terrified of living alone. I had added my name, just until she got on her feet. She never stood without leaning. And the duplex, I had bought it with part of my savings, thinking it would be an investment, a safety net for all of us. Instead, it became their nest, their entitlement, their excuse never to grow. "Fine," Mr. Hale said at last, shuffling the papers into neat piles. I'll have the documents prepared today. You'll need to sign multiple revocation forms. Once it's filed, their access ends immediately. Good, I said. End it. He studied me again as if trying to measure the steel in my voice. Most mothers hesitate. Even when children mistreat them, they fear regret. I met his eyes. I already regret 30 years of indulgence. I won't regret 30 minutes of freedom. One by one, he slid the documents toward me. The paper was thick, the ink crisp. Each signature felt like a slice through invisible cords that had bound me. My pen glided over the lines. Revocation. Termination. Cancellation. Words that once frightened me now felt like liberation. By the time I set the pen down, I felt lighter, though the weight of decades still clung faintly to my bones. On my way out, Mr. Hale touched my arm gently. Mrs. Reed, you're doing what many cannot. Protecting yourself. Don't falter. I nodded, stepping back into the winter air. The cold biting but clean. That evening back home, I pulled out stationery and began drafting the notice to Daniel and Katie. My hand didn't shake as I wrote. 60 days until lease renewal. New rent. Full market rate. If declined, vacate by deadline. I sealed the envelope, pressed it flat, and set it by the door. Tomorrow I would deliver it. Tonight I would sit in my kitchen, my yellow folder thinner now, my tea hotter, my silence stronger. I thought of Daniel's face when he would read the notice. His disbelief. His outrage. The sudden realization that the foundation under his life was never his own. You wanted me unnecessary, I murmured aloud, watching the steam curl from my cup. Now you'll learn what that really means. For decades I had been the invisible pillar. The mother who bent until she cracked. The provider who erased herself for the comfort of others. But that era ended with my son's voice in church, declaring me unwanted. So I answered him, not with wailing, not with begging, but with ink, paper, signatures. With the quiet preparation of a war they didn't yet know had *N. By the third evening after I had signed away their access and sealed their fate with legal ink, I heard the knock. It wasn't Daniel's pounding. I could imagine that, but a soft, rehearsed tapping, 3 polite knocks followed by silence. I opened the door a crack. And there she was. Katie holding a bright red tin of cookies with a bow tied across the lid. Her lips curved into that sugary smile she had perfected, the kind that looked sweet from a distance but reeked of poison up close. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice soft as butter. She had never called me Mom before. Always your mother, when speaking to Daniel. Never a name when speaking directly to me. Now suddenly I was Mom. I did not open the door wider. "What do you want, Katie?" Her eyes widened in mock surprise, as though the answer wasn't obvious. She held the tin out like an offering at an altar. "I baked these myself. We're worried about you. Thought maybe we could talk?" I let my gaze fall to the bow, then back to her face. "Worried about me? You were grinning in church when your husband humiliated me. Do you think a bow and a box of cookies erase that smirk?" Her hand trembled slightly, though she kept the smile pinned in place. "You misunderstood everything that night. Daniel was under stress, the holidays. He didn't mean." "No," I cut her off. "I understood perfectly. He meant every word and you enjoyed every second. I watched you smile while the congregation stared. You wanted me erased. But you didn't understand one thing, Katie." She tilted her head, trying to keep the act alive. "What's that?" "That I can hit back harder." For the first time the smile faltered. Her lips twitched, her eyes darted toward the tin as if she could hide behind it. "We don't want a fight," she said softly. "You started one." Behind her I noticed the car idling, headlights dimmed. Daniel's silhouette leaned against the driver's side, arms crossed. He hadn't even bothered to come up the walk. He had sent his wife as a shield, a diplomat with cookies. "Take them back," I said, nodding at the tin. "I have no appetite for sugar." Her fingers tightened around the lid. She looked at me for a long moment, then set the tin gently on the porch rail as though laying flowers on a grave. Without another word, she turned and walked back to the car. But the night was not finished with me. An hour later another knock. Heavier this time, deliberate. When I opened the door, Pastor Marsh stood there, his scarf wrapped tight, his breath clouding in the air. His eyes held that blend of concern and judgment I had seen 100 times before in his office when parishioners confessed their sins. "Mrs. Reed," he began, "I thought I should stop by. Daniel is, well, he regrets what happened. Perhaps you could find it in your heart to forgive?" I let the silence stretch until the cold seeped between us. Then I spoke. "Forgive a mistake, yes. Forgive a public stunt? Never." His brow furrowed. Sometimes words said in anger. Anger. I cut him short. "Did you hear hesitation in his voice, Pastor? Did you see shame in his face?" "No." He stood tall, spoke clearly, and humiliated me before God and everyone else. And Katie smiled as if she had rehearsed it. That was no accident. That was theater. He shifted, his hands clasped together. "Families have storms. They pass. It is Christmas after all." "Christmas," I repeated. "The night he told me I was not wanted. You think I will brush that aside because the calendar says I should be charitable? You think I will crawl back to their table like a dog, grateful for scraps?" "Please," he said softly. "Bitterness will only." I stepped closer, my voice low and hard. "Bitterness? Pastor, I have spent my life swallowing bitterness with a smile so my children could eat sweetness. I won't swallow anymore. Tell Daniel this. He made his choice in front of your entire congregation. I'm making mine now, in front of you. We are finished." The pastor searched my face, perhaps hoping to find softness. He found stone. With a small nod, he turned and left, his boots crunching down the snowy walk. I closed the door and locked it, leaning for a moment against the wood. My pulse thudded, but not with fear. With clarity. They thought they could smirk, send cookies, send a pastor to smooth the edges. They thought I would fall into the role I had always played, the apologizer, the peacemaker, the giver. Not anymore. The yellow folder waited on the table. I sat down, opened it and ran my hands across the papers. Each one was a wee asterisk p asterisk and sharper than words. More final than forgiveness. They had knocked at my door with smiles and sermons. I would answer with ink and law. By the third day the messages changed. No more rage, no more shouting into my voicemail about cruelty or betrayal. Daniel's voice came quieter now, strained with something he hadn't used in years. Pleading. "Mom, I went too far," he said in one message, his breath uneven as though he'd rehearsed it. "You know I didn't mean it. I was under pressure. Let's just bring things back to normal." Normal. The word made me laugh out loud in the silence of my kitchen. Normal was me paying his rent while he bragged about independence. Normal was me covering groceries while Katie posted photos of their perfect family dinners online. Normal was me transferring money into his accounts while he told neighbors he was self-made. I played the message again, listening carefully. Not once did he say he was sorry for humiliating me in church. Not once did he name the wound. His regret was not for what he had done, but for what it had cost him. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with my checkbook open and my pen poised. 4 years, every December, I had made the same donation. A substantial sum to Daniel's City Project Fund. It was my quiet way of keeping his career afloat, of making sure the community saw him as successful, of hiding the cracks in his management. This year I signed nothing. Instead, I wrote a letter to the board. I explained calmly that I was withdrawing my support. No explanations about family drama, no apologies. Just a simple statement. My resources were being redirected. The effect was immediate. Within days, calls came not just from Daniel but from members of his board. They were concerned. They were reconsidering future funding. The polite words were knives, and I knew exactly where they landed. Daniel's department relied on my annual donation as a signal to others. Without it, his entire scaffold wobbled. Another call came, his voice shaking now, the mask of confidence slipping. "Mom, please. The board is panicking. They froze half our funding. They want an audit. If you just reinstate your donation, everything goes back to normal. Please, Mom." I held the phone to my ear and let him finish, then answered with the clarity of stone. "No. Things are finally back where they belong. You're a grown man. Act like one." The silence on the other end was longer than any I had heard from him. For a moment I thought he might finally admit the truth, that he had depended on me all along, that his success was built on my invisible labor. But instead his voice came out hoarse, frantic. "You don't understand. Without you everything collapses. The house, the business, the projects. We can't." "Exactly," I said and hung up. That evening, as the sun sank behind the bare trees, I watched the snow catch the orange glow of the streetlights. My phone lay dark on the table. The house hummed with its old familiar sounds, the refrigerator ticking, the pipes groaning. But beneath it all was another sound, quieter but stronger. The crack of masks breaking. Daniel wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing the scaffolding I had built beneath him, the invisible structure that let him pretend to stand tall. I remembered the years of making excuses for him. When he missed payments, I told the landlord it was my oversight. When he defaulted on a loan, I explained to the bank that paperwork had been misplaced. When Katie's voice trembled with false worry, "Your mom gets tired, maybe she shouldn't join us," I ignored the barb and showed up anyway, casserole in hand. I had carried their world on my back. And now for the first time I had set it down. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel, this one shorter, angrier. "Mom, the audit starts next week. Do you know what you've done? They're tearing through everything. This is your fault." I deleted it without listening to the end. I brewed another cup of tea, sat at the table, and wrote another note to myself. "They're not afraid of losing me. They're afraid of losing what I built." The words looked back at me, sharp and undeniable. That night, I slept with the yellow folder under my pillow, not for comfort, but as a reminder. Every document inside was a blade, and I was finally learning how to use them. The following Monday, I walked into the First National Bank of Cedar Falls, the same bank where I had stood in countless lines, clutching deposit slips and utility bills, praying there would be enough in my account to cover everything. The marble floor echoed under my boots. The air smelled of ink and polish, sterile and sharp. For decades, this place had been my confessional. Here I had begged for extensions, signed loans with trembling hands, asked for small mercies. I had walked in as a servant of debt and walked out more burdened than when I entered. But today was different. Today, I came not as supplicant but as executioner. Mr. Klein, the branch manager, recognized me immediately. He had seen me too many times, always transferring money into Daniel's accounts, always apologizing for delays, always smiling the smile of a woman carrying other people's lives. He approached with his usual professional courtesy, but I caught a flicker of something else in his eyes, curiosity, maybe even respect. "Mrs. Reed," he said warmly, "what can we do for you today?" I set the yellow folder on his desk with deliberate weight. "I need to make several changes. Effective immediately." He gestured for me to sit. His office was tidy, every file in order, a framed photo of his family on the desk, children smiling in matching sweaters. For a moment I envied the simplicity of that picture, the illusion of harmony. Then I opened my folder and began. "First," I said, "the family safe deposit box. I want it closed. I'll move my bonds into a personal trust under my sole control." His eyebrows lifted, but he nodded. "Of course." "Second," I continued, "remove my name from all co-signed credit lines with my son Daniel Reed. Any and all obligations I've guaranteed, terminate them." He hesitated. "That will trigger a partial repayment demand. Are you certain?" "I am." "And third, the Reed Family Fund account. Close it. Redirect the remaining balance to a charity trust, the Cedar Falls Foundation for Single Mothers." For the first time his professional mask slipped. He studied me, his eyes narrowing with something between admiration and sorrow. "That's decisive." "It's overdue," I said simply. He processed the paperwork with steady hands, sliding each document toward me. The pen felt heavier than usual, as if every signature carried not just ink but decades of memory. I signed my name and saw flashes of the past. Daniel at 25, sweating over his first business loan, begging me to co-sign because "no one believes in me like you do, Mom." Katie, beaming as I paid the down payment on their duplex, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, promising they'd pay me back in a year or two. Rebecca, crying in my kitchen when her credit card was maxed, assuring me she'd learn this time, as I transferred money to cover the debt. Every signature then had been an act of faith. Every signature today was an act of closure. When the last page was signed, Mr. Klein gathered the documents neatly. It's done, he said. Daniel's credit line will collapse without your guarantor status. The bank will demand partial repayment immediately. I nodded. Good. He hesitated again, then lowered his voice. Mrs. Reed, forgive me, but I've seen you sacrifice for years. If anyone deserves peace, it's you. For a moment my throat tightened. Of all the words spoken to me in the past week, his carried more kindness than any from my children. I thanked him, collected my folder, and walked out. By the time I reached my car, the first call came. Daniel's voice exploded through the speaker the moment I answered. Mom! They just demanded partial repayment. What the hell did you do? I sat behind the wheel, watching snow swirl against the windshield. I withdrew my name. That's all. Now it's your problem. You can't just walk away from this. Do you want us homeless? Do you want Katie and the baby on the street? His voice cracked, not with sorrow but with rage. You're insane, he shouted. No mother does this. None. I let the silence stretch until his breathing turned ragged. Then I spoke slowly, each word cold and final. No, son. I'm not insane. I'm just done being stupid. The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment, the hum of the car heater filling the silence. My hands trembled not with fear but with release. Decades of burden had shifted. The scaffolding was gone. For the first time the weight was not mine. I placed the phone face down on the seat and drove home. The snow thickening, the road ahead pale and clear. The knock wasn't polite this time. It rattled the windows, shook the frame, echoed through the house like thunder. I didn't need to look through the curtains to know it was Daniel. The air itself seemed to pulse with his rage. When I opened the door, there he was, my son, my firstborn, my once beloved boy, standing on the porch with his fists clenched, his face red as if carved from fury. The cold whipped around him, snow dusting his hair, but he didn't seem to notice. Behind him, in the car idling at the curb, Katie sat in the passenger seat, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking. Whether it was real sobbing or performance, I no longer cared. You're destroying this family, Daniel bellowed, his voice so loud it carried across the street. Lights flicked on in neighboring houses. Curtains twitched. I knew the neighbors were listening. Good. Let them. I stood firm in the doorway, my hand braced against the frame. No, I said calmly. You destroyed it when you made me a spectacle in church. His chest heaved. You want your grandson to suffer? You want him to grow up without stability? Without a roof over his head? You're a monster. My jaw tightened. I had expected this. The final P***N. Not reason, not apology, but a child held up as a shield. Don't you dare, I said, my voice sharp as glass. Don't you dare hide behind my grandson. I raised my children. I carried you through storms, fed you with food I couldn't afford, kept the lights on when your father left. I've done my part. Now it's your turn to be a father. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a drowning man gasping for air. He looked nothing like the boy I had raised, nothing like the man he pretended to be. He looked small, cornered, stripped of his scaffolding. You don't understand, he shouted. His voice cracked, the sound of a man who had never learned to stand on his own legs. You've taken everything from us. How are we supposed to survive? I stepped forward, the cold air stinging my face. The same way I did. By working. By cutting back. By making sacrifices. By swallowing your pride and doing the things you think you're too good for. That's what adults do, Daniel. That's what parents do. From the car, Katie let out a wail. Please, Mrs. Reed. Think of the baby. I turned my gaze to her, sharp and unwavering. You thought of the baby when you smiled in church as your husband humiliated me? You thought of the baby when you whispered poison into my children's ears? No, Katie. You thought of yourself. And now you can think of yourself while you pay your own bills. Daniel's face twisted, red with fury, pale with desperation. You'll regret this, he roared. One day you'll need us and we won't be there. I let a thin, cold smile touch my lips. Daniel, you've never been there. The words landed like a slap. For a moment silence hung between us, heavy and absolute. His fists loosened, his shoulders sagged, and in that instant I saw the truth. Without me he was hollow. Katie sobbed louder in the car. Daniel turned his head toward her, then back at me. his expression crumbling. He wanted to say something else, another accusation, another plea. But I didn't give him the chance. I closed the door. The sound of the latch sliding into place echoed through the house like a final verdict. On the other side, I could still hear his muffled shouts, the slam of his fist against the wood, Katie's crying. But inside there was only silence. For the first time in decades, the weight slipped from my shoulders. It didn't vanish. No, the scars of sacrifice never vanish, but it shifted, no longer pressing me into the floor. I leaned against the door, closed my eyes, and let the silence seep into me. My body trembled, not from fear but from release. It was over. The endless cycle of giving, the endless expectation, the endless humiliation, over. Through the window I saw Daniel finally storm back to the car, his breath fogging the night, his movements jerky, uncontrolled. He slammed the door, started the engine, and tore away down the street. The taillights vanished into the snow. The house was mine again. I walked through the room slowly, touching the furniture, the pictures, the small relics of my life. For years, this place had been nothing more than a staging ground for their demands. The place where bills were paid, meals prepared, favors extended. Tonight, it became something else. It became sanctuary. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and listened. The pipes groaned. The wind rattled the windows. My heartbeat steadied. No shouting, no demands, no manipulation. I whispered into the stillness, a vow to myself. Never again. And for the first time in years I believed it. Christmas morning arrived quietly, as though the world itself had conspired to erase the noise of the past weeks. No frantic knocks, no buzzing phone, no demands disguised as affection. Just silence, layered thick as the snow outside my window. I rose slowly, savoring the stillness. For the first time in decades, there was no obligation pulling me out of bed. No stockings to fill, no oven timer screaming. No frantic rush to make sure everyone else's joy was purchased with my exhaustion. The house was mine. The day was mine. I baked an apple pie. Not for Daniel, not for Rebecca, not for grandchildren or guests. Just for me. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the kitchen, wrapping itself around me like the embrace I no longer expected from anyone else. I lit a single candle on the table, its flame dancing against the dim light of morning. From the shelf I pulled out an old record, a carol album I had bought when Daniel was 10 and Rebecca was 7. Back then we had sung along together. Their voices shrill and sweet, mine cracked with fatigue but warm with love. Now alone I set the record on the turntable. The first notes wavered through the room, and instead of sorrow I felt peace. The phone buzzed. I stared at it for a long time, my hand hovering over the counter. Part of me wanted to let it ring into silence, as I had done so many times. But something in me, a final cold clarity, wanted to hear the words one last time. I answered. On the other end, Daniel's voice was not the roar of the man on my porch or the cold authority of the man in church. It was broken, desperate, stripped of pride. Mom, please. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Just put everything back the way it was. We can't manage without you. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink into me. For years, those pleas had been my chains. Each "we can't manage" had sent me running, patching holes, covering bills, saving them from consequences. But now his voice only sounded like wind against a closed window, noisy, powerless. You wanted a life without me, I said evenly. Now you have it. Enjoy it, son. There was a gasp, a stutter, a silence on the other end. Then the line went dead. I set the phone face down on the counter, walked back to the table and cut a slice of pie. The crust flaked beneath the knife, the steam rising in gentle spirals. I placed it on a plate, lit the candle again and sat down. Outside, snow drifted in slow, silent sheets, blanketing the world in white. Each flake seemed to erase another memory. Daniel's laughter as a boy, Rebecca's hand in mine, Katie's smile in church. Gone, buried, cold. And yet I did not feel empty. For decades, Christmas had been a battlefield I fought alone, making joy out of nothing, hiding exhaustion behind ribbons and wrapping paper. This Christmas was different. This Christmas belonged to me. I chewed slowly, the sweetness of apple and sugar filling my mouth. Tears did not come. Regret did not come. Only warmth. I thought of the church, of Daniel's voice ringing out across the carols. You're not wanted at Christmas. He had meant it as humiliation. He had meant it as exile. but in truth it had been a door. And I had walked through it, leaving behind the endless cycle of giving without gratitude, of sacrifice without respect. I looked at the candle, the flame steady despite the drafts of winter pressing against the windows. That flame was me, small perhaps but stubborn, refusing to die. The phone remained silent. Daniel would call again, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in a week. Rebecca might call too, repeating Katie's lines, trying to lure me back into the old role. But I knew now that I would never answer. I whispered to myself, to the empty house, to the snow outside. I choose me. The record spun, the pie cooled, the candle flickered. And in that quiet, I felt something I had not felt in decades. Not loneliness. Freedom. It was the first Christmas I had chosen myself. And the warmest I'd had in decades.